Reading with your kids.
Hola, niho, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please tell all of your family and friends about the podcast, tell your kids' teachers, and please subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Leticia Amaya. She is a literacy expert, and she has some great tips to help this school year be your kid's best school year ever. Before we invite Leticia into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us. There's so many places you can connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Reading With Your Kids on TikTok, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. Check out our Pinterest page. Also, please be sure to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. You can sign up for our free newsletter and also click on the contact button at the top of the page to let us know what you love about the podcast. Let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the show. Also, we would love for you to join us live August 6th in just a couple of days, August 6th, 2022. At the Buttonwood Park Zoo in beautiful New Bedford, Massachusetts. We'll be celebrating episode number 1500 of the Reading With Your Kids podcast. We'll have totally interactive magic. We'll have magic lessons. We'll have author interviews. We'll have authors reading their stories aloud live there at the zoo. We'll be giving away loads and loads and loads of books, and we're also going to be interviewing a number of guests at the zoo. We would love to interview you. Imagine hearing yourself in a future episode of the show. It's all happening in just a few days, August 6th, 2022, at the beautiful Buttonwood Park Zoo in the wonderful city of New Bedford, Massachusetts. Join us right now from beautiful Southern California. Our guest today is here to give us some insight on how we can best help our kids fall in love with reading. Please welcome to the show literacy expert Leticia Amaya. Hey, Leticia, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
Wonderful. I was telling Leticia it's hot here, but we're not used to the 100-degree temperatures here in Boston, so we're all kind of melting. But we're still pretty blessed and still really enjoying being here in the world.
Yeah, it's pretty warm here in Southern California as well, but East Coast heat definitely takes it to a whole other level.
Yeah, I think it's just because we're not used to it and we're kind of wimpy. You know, we're
right.
big and strong in the wintertime when it gets down to like minus 14 or something. Mm-hmm. But the summertime comes and it's like, this is gross.
Yes. We get the extreme winter on the East Coast for sure.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mentioned that, you know, this weather is kind of gross. Unfortunately, there's a lot of kids in the world who, when they think about reading, they think that it's gross. Mm-hmm. And I have a feeling that a lot of those kids who have that really negative attitude about reading are kids who just haven't been able to find success with it.
Right. And I think that that's really unfortunate. I think the love for reading starts in the womb, and it starts with us reading our favorite stories to our children. And in our case, our son is bilingual, so we do English and Spanish. And so I think the love of reading starts in children's storybooks, in picture books. And, you know, I think that, a lot of times I hear parents say, oh, my child reads the same books over and over. It's because those are their favorite books and where they most feel successful, where maybe they have special memories about those books. So I feel like the more that we expose our children to, the more that they will not only love, but have a passion for reading.
Yeah. First, I have to thank you. Because when my son was coming into the world 30 years ago, I read to him when he was in the womb, and people thought I was bananas, including my wife. But I said, I read this somewhere, so lie down and let me read. And but you're telling me I did a good thing.
Yes. We did the same thing with our son. We played music for him. We read special books. And, I have to say that he learned reading very early on. And when I say reading, I mean like looking at pictures, learning to flip the book. Like those are all important characteristics of reading.
I think that that's a super point to make to parents, because a lot of parents, I'm imagining, get frustrated with, their neighbors are saying, oh, my son's reading independently and he's 4.5 years old. And meanwhile, your kid is struggling at maybe 5 or 6 years old. But there's so much we can celebrate when our kids are reading, just attending to the pictures, knowing that the page is flipped from one direction to the other. Those are reading skills that are essential to learn.
Exactly. Reading isn't only the words in the book. Reading is learning that you read from left to right, that you flip the pages from going to the left, that you're looking at the pictures. And in picture books, you don't have to read the words because you're reading the picture. You're looking at what's happening, what happened first, what happened then, what happened next. And those are the conversations that you have with your children in those early years of literacy. You go through the books, you talk to them about each page, you ask wondering questions. I wonder what this character's thinking here. I wonder why they did that. Or you relate to the character. Oh, I feel bad for the character. I remember feeling that way once too. You have these literacy conversations with your children. And then when their time comes, it becomes second nature to them because you've been doing it with them their whole life.
Yeah. I love that you pointed out something that we've celebrated here on the podcast, the idea of taking a picture walk through the book before you even read the story. Even you can go so far as to cover up the words and just have a conversation. What do you think is happening here? Can you talk a little bit, because I'm just a dope here on the podcast sharing things, but you know the science behind it. Can you tell us what's going on when we're taking that picture walk? What's the benefit? What are the kids learning from having those conversations about what they think the story is based on the pictures?
Well, when you take a picture walk, it teaches children many things. One is it teaches them to take a tour of the book, to get to know the book. And that's what readers do. You look through it, you see if it's something that interests you. The second thing that kids learn when they take picture walks is that they start to really pay attention to the details in the story or in the pictures. And that really helps them have a deeper understanding of the story. And the third thing you teach them is what later on they know as predictions, what's going to happen in the story. Just by taking that picture walk, you can make a prediction. What do you think is going to happen? You can also help identify characters. So what you're teaching early readers to do is learn about story elements without calling it a story element, right? You talk about your setting and your characters and making predictions. And so those are all things that come later on in like the elementary years. But for our early readers, when you have these conversations early on, it helps them create the foundation for comprehension.
Mm-hmm. And that's a point that I think we forget about. It's my beautiful wife just retired after teaching special needs kids here in Boston for 34 years. And that was one of the things that was hard for her to get across to some of her parents. Kids would come in and they would be able to identify the sounds each letter made and could even read words on sight. But they always read like this.
Right.
And there wasn't any comprehension going on. And we need to remember there's more than just understanding and putting the phonics together to know what the words are. We have to understand what we're reading too.
Exactly. And so, right. So a child might not have that letter sound correspondence yet. Their fluency might be it might be limited. It doesn't mean they're not understanding the book. They might have other ways of understanding the book, again, through pictures or, if they're reading a few sentences and they're starting to have a bit of comprehension along with the words, helping them have a deeper understanding for it. So correct. Reading isn't just reading the words. That's one component of it. When kids read, like nowadays, especially after COVID, like they do need a little bit of that foundational work, that phonics work, right? That, many of us grew up with many years ago. And so now it's coming back again.
I'm at an age, as I'm approaching 100 years old, it's been so weird seeing these concepts in education that were so important, and then they kind of say, no, we don't need those things anymore. We're going to do this new thing. And then suddenly, we have this new thing, phonics. We're going to go, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's not new. I learned that 100 years ago.
Exactly. So now they call it the science of reading, but it's really, it's your baseline phonics work that some children, they pick up reading, they kind of learn it backwards. They learn to read first. They don't really know why the letters make certain sounds or what the rules are, but they've picked up the English language system, and they understand that certain vowels make certain sounds and that certain endings have certain sounds. But while other kids know, they need those foundational skills, the phonics work, so that they can make the connection between the letter and sound correspondence and reading it on a page in a word, and understand that vowels make many sounds. Consonants are going to make, their same sound unless they're an exception.
That's one of the things we've talked about here in the podcast, and I hope you can elaborate on it. A lot of kids, a lot of families out there are working with kids who have a reading challenge like dyslexia. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was kind of mind-blowing, but it made perfect sense to me, is that a lot of kids who are struggling with dyslexia, it's not so much that the problem is in their brain. The problem is just as much in our language. We have 26 letters that are symbols for 46 different sounds or so. It's like, wait a minute, there's a problem here. And, and so while some kids can go, here are the rules, but there are exceptions to rules. Other kids are like, wait a minute, my brain doesn't handle that. It's supposed to, the rule is supposed to be this.
Right. So go ahead.
Oh no, I was like, how can we best help our kids? How can we best when a teacher tells us we think your son or daughter may be having dyslexia, how can we best not freak out about that? And then how can we best support our kids?
Well, I think the misconception is if my child has some form of reading disability or dyslexia, then they must not be smart. And that's not the case. There's many successful people today that have dyslexia and, have gone on to universities, work in politics, work for tech companies. And so what happens is when you have a reading disability is that you basically have to teach the child in a different way. So I'm really big with kids who have different reading disabilities, such as dyslexia. I'm really big on hands-on learning activities. So some things parents can do at home is you can get a little mini chalkboard or a whiteboard, and you can put shaving cream on it, and then have the kids create letters on the board with shaving cream on top, because it's kind of that multi-sensory approach of figuring out how to form that letter, right? If you're learning about letters or sounds. And same thing with, we can also use sand. It's the exact same idea. You can have them form letters in the sand with their finger. You can tell them what sound it makes as they're saying it. So as they're forming the letter, they're saying N, and they're writing it in the sand or in the shaving cream. So you want to kind of think outside the box, right? If you're sitting there with a worksheet with your child, obviously that's not going to be very fun for them. So the best way for them to learn is through games. You could use Jenga and put the letters on the Jenga blocks. And then as they take out one of the Jengas to put, stack it on top, there's a letter on it. So then they have to say the letter and the sound, L, and then put it on top. So it's really about, I think personally, about giving kids hands-on experiences where they can make those connections. And then of course there's music. Like YouTube has so many videos on, letters and sounds that, of course, you don't want your child to sit in front of the computer, but you can play it for them as you're playing with them on the floor. And so they're hearing the letters and the sounds. A lot of kids, early on, children develop a broad range of vocabulary because of the oral language, if you think about babies, right? So if you can do some of that with your children at home, you definitely can. Along with, if you're able to, maybe ask for tutoring. A lot of libraries offer free tutoring. If it's possible, some teachers sometimes might offer lunchtime tutoring for 20 minutes. So it's always good to ask because you never know.
Mm-hmm. Those ideas are so ingenious. That idea that, because I see a lot of, and I think myself, as I'm waving my hands and gesturing here, I think I was a real tactile learner. Mm-hmm. And I think that, taking the kids, instead of having them really suffer over a worksheet and get out the shaving cream, I mean, that would be such, as we say here in Boston, that'd be like wicked fun. To learn your letters with the shaving cream or with mud or with sand.
Right, with mud, with sand, exactly. Yeah, let them get dirty. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think we need to get out of our heads the idea that learning only happens in rows in a classroom.
Yes.
With everybody with a nice clean shirt on in a quiet room and people raising their hand and orderly. And that's not the way human beings evolved. This idea that kids were in classrooms, in rows, in the terms of human history, that's a fairly new thing. It's only in the last 100 or so years that kids have been expected to learn in that way. Before that, we were learning in the fields when we were helping with the harvesting, the gardening, and apprenticing, and all that other kind of stuff. So, yeah, go outside the box and have some. I think as a parent, that would be a lot of fun.
For sure. I think that we do have to move away from that because our kids are going through a different learning experience than we did. And it's a different time. COVID definitely adds to its complications. And so it's really hard for us to, understand that, right? Because we didn't have that same experience as our kids did. Mm-hmm. So I think the more hands-on activities you can do with your kids, the better. You can also paint letters with them. For our older kids who maybe are in second, third grade, the upper grades, you kind of want to think of something. Maybe they want to paint, maybe the sand thing or the shaving cream thing might not be for them. Mm-hmm. So you can always include them in your daily routines. Hey, let's make a list of what are we going to do for today? Let's make a list. Or we're going to the grocery store. Will you help me? Once you're at the grocery store, where are the apples? Do you see the word apple? And then have them point to it again. They're making those connections. Mm-hmm. So I think that we have to think about kind of our daily activities and how can we include our children in that and create it more literacy based. For older kids who like to sing, you could always do karaoke, right? The words are right there on the screen for them. Mm-hmm. So I think the more activities you do for them, the better.
And I think that's a great way to help kids understand the value of literacy when they see that it's part of their day-to-day life and that reading isn't only happening when you're sitting down in front of a book. Reading is happening when we're at the grocery store, when we're driving,
all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
Yes. And it's the basis because without reading, then you don't have writing, math. When you think of story problems are really big, heavy right now in the schools. And so it's all comprehension and literacy based. Mm-hmm. And so it's really important to, again, make it fun for our kids and give them those foundational skills.
Yeah. So very important. Leticia, one of the things that I saw when I was visiting your website is you had a blog there that was titled Connecting Parents and Teachers. What can I ask my child's teacher?
Yes.
If your kid hasn't already started back for the new school year, they'll be starting back real soon. What
Yes.
are some of those things we can ask our kids' teachers?
I think something you can definitely ask your teacher is, what are your observations? How can I support my son or daughter in school? What do you suggest I do with them at home? In addition to, more than anything, try to get information from the teacher as far as like, where is their child at the beginning of the school year? For example, if it's reading, then, ask something reading based, such as, should I get specific books at home? Should I go to the library? What type of book should I get? Teachers know reading levels. It's hard for parents to kind of comprehend that leveling system. So I would be very specific and ask for titles. What can you give me some titles of books that I can check out from the local library to support my child? And I think that would be really helpful.
Yeah. And we've touched on this a little bit here in the podcast. The value of beginning a relationship with the teacher at the very beginning of the school year. Instead of, I think the relationship between teachers and parents for a lot of families, it starts when the kid gets in trouble.
Yes.
And there's a call home. And so the first conversation a teacher and parent has is, hey, your kid messed up today. We got to deal with this. And a lot of times parents get very defensive right away. And how important is it just to have that right from the start of the school year, have that relationship, go in there, let the teacher know that, hey, we're a team, that we're not fighting against each other. We're working together to make sure that my kid gets the best education he or she needs.
I agree. I think COVID really showed parents how much teachers do in the classroom. And, teachers deal with great times, fun times. We also deal with meltdowns and hard moments. And so parents saw that for the first time during COVID, like, whoa, I didn't realize my child was doing this in the classroom. And so again, I feel like COVID has helped, I think, bridge that gap that may have been there in the sense of like, oh, they're at school, the teacher will take care of it. But I think those times are gone and it's different now. And I don't think you have to wait until a parent conference or for the teacher to call or write a note or email and let you know that there's a concern. I think, I know culturally in some cultures, parents want to respect the teacher and kind of give the teacher their space. At the same time, as an educator, I'm sure your wife can attest to this too. Like, we really appreciate when parents reach out, even if it's just like, hi, I'm just checking in, wanted to see if you needed anything, or send in a ream of copy paper. Hi, maybe you could use a little extra ream of paper. Let me know if you need anything, and then kind of go from there. Mm-hmm. So I really think sending the teacher a quick little message, a note, any type of little message you could send. First day of school, a little, pot of flowers, something, or, maybe a card from your child, just to let the parent know that you do want to connect and introduce yourself. Like, don't be afraid to introduce yourself and let them know that you're here for them. Yep. And that we're here to support. It's not like they're doing their thing and teaching your child and then there's a disconnect at home, but it's really more of a collaboration. As they say, it takes a tribe. And in this case, the more you connect with your teacher, the more you'll know about what's going on with your child in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we had great relationships with our kids' teachers throughout their entire education, K through 12.
Yes.
And it was really, really helpful. It was mostly helpful because we became buddies with a lot of the teachers, but a lot of the calls that we got from the teachers were, hey, your kid did really, really well.
Right.
I just want to let you know your kid is a star. We still get, occasionally we get the calls, hey, there's a problem here. Middle school is like, oh, yeah. But even when we were having those difficult moments in middle school, we also got the, hey, he's been doing great, and it's been wonderful. And I think that just having those relationships, it's so very important and helpful.
For sure.
You mentioned, before we go, earlier that your son is bilingual and that you read to your kid in English and Spanish. Yes. I've heard a lot of, and even with my kids, we are a multicultural family here, and we read with our kids. But the interesting thing was that my beautiful wife's parents, whose first language is Spanish, when my son went to kindergarten, they stopped speaking to him in Spanish because they didn't want to confuse him. Oh. I was really disappointed. Can you talk a little bit about the fact that, no, keep bilingualing your kids because it's not confusing?
Right. And so that's definitely a big misconception. And what happens is a lot of children will enter a dual language program. And then by second or third grade, parents start to panic and they're like, oh no, the Spanish is too hard. We're going to take them out. And it's definitely a big misconception. So children they don't get confused. They're like little sponges and they do not fall behind. There is a little bit what's called a lag. And so one language will be dominant over the other. But what happens over time is that they basically catch up. I mean, there's tons of studies on their cognitive development, their critical thinking development, and the fact that children, in the end, when it comes to any type of state test or SATs, any type of formal test, children do perform higher because they have a different level of like critical and analytical thinking skills that comes along with being bilingual or trilingual. And the U.S. is the only country that promotes like English or English being the dominant language. When we talk to people from other countries, it's not uncommon to know people who speak 3 to 4 languages. So as far as teaching kids another language, they're like sponges. And if they can learn a second or third language, like, don't be afraid. The key is consistency. I do Spanish with my son. My husband does English. It does get difficult because we live in an English world, but it's all, again, it's all about consistency. And if you stay consistent, it will pay off in the long run, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it also takes a while. Some parents will say, well, they understand it, but they don't speak it. But research shows that it can take 6 to 7 years for a child to master the verbal language. So you have to give them the time that they need, even if they don't speak it, but they understand it and they can read it. You have to give them that time to be able to process the verbal part and be able to articulate themselves in the language that they're learning, whether it's Spanish or French or which other.
I love when my kids are both in that situation where they understand much more and they don't have the confidence to speak. We love it when we travel to Puerto Rico or to Panama or Costa Rica where there's so many English speakers. Or the same way there in Costa Rica, we ran into a lot of people who understood English but weren't able to speak English. And they would have conversations. My kids would speak in English. Their friends would speak in Spanish. And they completely knew what was going on.
Right.
I have no problem speaking in Spanish. I am not fluent at all, but I don't worry about making mistakes because when I make a mistake, it becomes a great story.
Exactly. And, I lived on the East Coast for many years. I lived in New York. And so New York and Massachusetts have some of the strongest dual language programs. So definitely take advantage.
Absolutely. Hey, I know people are going to want to know where you've given us so much great information, where they can go to find out more about you and maybe connect with you if they have a question.
Sure. So I have a blog called Outside of the Sandbox. You can definitely find me there. I'm also on Instagram at Leticia_Amaya 8. And you can follow me there. And my account is public. And so I usually post tips on things you can do with your children at home. and we're gearing up for back to school. So I'm doing a few back to school activities and suggestions for parents.
We've had a great, really eye-opening time speaking with literacy expert Leticia Amaya. Leticia, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Michelle Wagner. She's returning to the show to celebrate Mickey on the Move farming. That's the next episode of the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Chris, want to start by thanking our guest, Leticia Amaya. Please be sure to check out her website. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Nicole Belcastro, Mirabella Q, Rain Pan. Want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.